Vietnam veterans of Reddit. What's one story you want to share before there's nobody left to tell it? In Vancouver, we didn't get that many vets, but draft dodgers were plenty. I worked with a guy who confessed to being an American on the run. He was up for his draft intake exam and his father was an Army general. When it came down to it, though, Dad had seen enough conflict and death in the Second World War, and encouraged him to fail it. He said he spent the weekend before the exam drinking scotch and eating salt pork. Apparently, that shot his blood pressure through the roof temporarily, but he needed a second disability to fail. He had worked for a drug company as an analgesic tester. He'd take a new med, put on a pair of earphones, and a technician would play tones into them. When it reached a painful level, he'd indicate so, and the results of several testers would be compared against people without medication. As a result, he became very familiar with headphones and tones, and found it easy to imitate a substantial level of deafness in one ear when an Army-approved technician tested him. Do you know you're deaf in one ear? Really? Seriously, the results might have been squinted at, but the doctor was known to be anti-war and listed him as 4F. Nonetheless, he headed out for Canada just to play it safe with Dad the General's encouragement. Close friend of mine was USAF SAR. I come from Mass and at the time we had a very large Vietnamese population. Well, he got to talking to a Vietnamese guy who just started working at his shop. Since they were of age, they started talking about the war. After some time turns out the other guy was shooting at my friend as he was getting a downed pilot and he was shooting back. Best thing was they laughed about it now and proceeded to go get shit-faced drunk to celebrate neither of them being able to shoot straight to save their life. Heard they remained good friends until my friend passed. R.I.P. Dave. A friend of mine was a Vietnam vet and he's dead now, so I'll share his story. My friend, John, was in the Marines. He was in Da Nang, and also fought in Hue during the Tet Offensive. Those are the only things I remember specifically. One night, John was on sentry duty and he saw someone sneaking into the camp. The VC were always sneaking in and causing trouble, so it was a serious problem. John caught the guy and the guy tried to run away, so John shot and killed him. It turned out to be the camp barber, a local guy who cut hair for all the Marines and who was popular and well liked. Maybe the guy was actually a VC undercover and was up to no good. Maybe he was just sneaking in for another reason and was really a good guy. He was dead now, so there was no way to know. So John went without a haircut for a month or two. One day, a colonel saw him and started yelling at him about his appearance and asked him why he didn't get a haircut. John replied, "Sir, I shot the barber." John told me that story with a hearty laugh. But it was the kind of funny but not really funny laugh you do sometimes when telling a story like that. John also added that he thinks about that guy whenever he gets a haircut. He sort of dropped that little comment in at the end like it didn't mean much, but it made a big impact on me. John told me that story 30 years after the war had ended. I thought about how many haircuts he'd gotten in the past 30 years, and how every time he sat in the barber's chair, he thought about a man he'd killed. That's war. It's not all the big, terrible stuff. It's living the rest of your life not being able to do something simple like get a haircut, or brush your teeth, or eat a hamburger, without being haunted by a memory. Recently got my dad to open up a little bit about his Vietnam experiences. He was stationed in Thailand at one of the Air Force bases there. He talked about having to hose down vehicles full of guts and blood and was an apprentice mortician. His big story was he and another guy were doing a perimeter patrol with a dog. One had a shotgun and the other an M16. The dog started freaking out and they entered a little empty spot in the trees and a full-grown tiger was laying in the clearing, cleaning itself. Dad and that other guy scooped up the dog and ran back to the base before it spotted them. My father was involved in men's groups. When I turned 16 they welcomed me into manhood. We fasted, we drummed, I smoked tobacco from pipe. During the session, at one time, we all had to tell a difficult story or something bad that had happened to us. I will never forget one gentleman who said he served in Vietnam. He said for 2 years he was on a boat in a river and attacked villages along the riverbanks. Sometimes there were Viet Congs, sometimes there weren't. He confessed to killing women and children and innocent people. 25 years later, I can still see him sobbing. Trauma is real. My father was a Marine helicopter crew chief. During his first tour they transported a lot of ARVN units. They were always told that any ARVN turned around after you dropped them off, you shot them, then find the grenade they left in the aircraft. He said he never found any grenades, but shot several ARVN. One time, they were landing in some tall grasses, and as the ARVN were jumping out, My dad saw two Vietnamese rise up out of the grass in the distance. He immediately opened up with the door gun and cut them both down. It was an ARVN regimental commander and an escort. No one had told my old man there was already troops in the field. His first sergeant later told him, "Damned gooks should have stayed down until we left." Nothing was ever said officially. Friendly fire against ARVN units was not a major concern. During my childhood, I remember my dad waking up in the middle of the night, screaming. He eventually drank himself to death, died at the age of 61. 2 tours in Vietnam, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and severe PTSD. This would be amazing with a serious tag. I hope it gets real answers. My grandfather was in the U.S. Air Force. His story is a bit of a nicer one. He mostly flew reconnaissance in a C-47, though he said it was rather boring. No dangerous situations, no crashes, as normal as being in the Air Force in Vietnam could be. At base, I don't recall which, a lot of the guys liked playing cards with the locals. Apparently one of those bicycle rickshaw drivers was very good at poker. So good he offered a bet to one of the guys on base that he would work rickshaw 1 hour on a night leave. The airman took the bet, and lost. Gave my grandpa and some other very amused guys a ride to one of the bars. Heard it from a coworker who heard it from a former coworker of his that said he was in Vietnam, so I have no idea how true it is, but sure did sound interesting. Coworker told me the guy was always smoking weed and the reason why he always smoked weed was because it saved his life in Vietnam. Supposedly he was in a Jeep, smoking and dropped his joint on the floor. He reached down to pick it up and at that moment, someone had tossed a grenade towards him. If he had been sitting up, the grenade would have probably hit him, fallen into the Jeep and went off. Instead it went over his head and exploded on the other side of the Jeep. So from that day forward, he swore weed saved his life. Even if it is fake, sure is a better fake story than how everyone was a Navy SEAL. My former roommate was drafted and went to Vietnam. The day before he was going home he got shot and was paralyzed from the waist down. Nancy Reagan visited him in the hospital. He was proud of that photo. But then his fiancée visited him and just couldn't handle it and broke off their relationship. Understandable, I guess. But really poor timing. Saddest person I've ever known. My uncle recently shared a story with me about being stationed on the USS Bonhomme Richard, CV/CV-831, as an aircraft mechanic. One day a cargo plane arrived and the crew were told they would be headed off the coast of South Korea. The men on board the cargo plane told them that they would not be allowed to approach the plane but that they should continue normal crew operations. The ship then moved into position off the coast of South Korea, staying there for about a week. Then the plane and its crew left and they returned back to Vietnamese waters. He tells me that he suspected it was a nuclear missile or warhead and they were being stationed closer to North Korea should whatever diplomatic situation was at the time deteriorated into nuclear war. Crazy stuff. My grandfather passed away a few years ago, so I'll keep his story alive. I'm not military, so I apologize for incorrect or missing terminology. He had just gotten off a 72-hour patrol assignment. Apparently he would talk shit to the officers when they gave stupid orders, which landed him on this duty a lot. During the patrol he found the switch for his weapon, M16, was getting stuck while trying to switch from single fire and rapid fire. The guy at the armory fixed him up and it would switch smooth as butter. Fast forward, he was in a long flatbed loading sandbags. They were told to stack them 3 high. And he'd already gotten most of the way done. A kid randomly ran out of the jungle and tossed a grenade under the truck. He swore the truck lifted off the ground, but the sandbags saved him. He ran after the kid into the jungle. When he got back, he told the other guys he couldn't find the boy and let out a few rounds in frustration. What actually happened is he found the kid in a clearing. The boy was around 9 or so and looked terrified. I tapped it to full auto and pulled the trigger. Everyone says you want to sweep across in automatic fire. The truth is, if you do that, the person might end up between bullets. I went from the ground up. Cut that kid in half. I didn't want him to come back and kill someone. I was 11 when he had that flashback for the first time and was the first person he told. Fuck that war. One of my grandma's neighbors was in Vietnam. He says there was a young girl who used to visit them in their camp. She was an orphan and the guys just sort of looked after her. They got things set up to have bring to the United States to be adopted. Right before they could finalize everything the Viet Cong strapped a bomb to her and when she came to visit her soldier friends she blew up in front of everyone. My grandpa was a member of the 5th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment in Vietnam and I wrote an article about him for a uni course for this very reason. Apologies for any formatting mistakes as I'm on mobile and don't have access to my notes. My grandfather, Richard, Joined the Army on the 19th of October in 1964 and was slotted into the war in 1966. When I interviewed him, we spoke for hours about his experiences. One of the things he was so clear about was how difficult it was, going through the jungles. It's hot and sticky and you get frustrated, and once that happens people get hurt. He opened up to me during that interview and told me that his best mate was killed in front of him. I'll quote him here. "We were ambushing a trail, and for whatever reason, John moved positions and got shot. We needed to get a helicopter to him, but it was a near inky black darkness that you couldn't see through. We managed to get him out by getting to a clearing and shooting a star shell for the helicopter to find us. But he never made it." Grandpa had known John for most of his life, and upon his return to Australia visited his mother. He began to cry, and that was the first time I had ever heard him cry. At the end of the interview, I asked him if he regretted anything, or if he worried what history might think of his actions. He told me, "I don't care what history thinks of me. I have no qualms about what I did." I also asked him if he had killed someone, and he laughed and said that your cousin when he joined the army asked me the same thing, and I'll tell you what I told him. "I wouldn't tell you even if I knew. You couldn't see 5 feet in front of your face and you felt like you were shooting blindly at the bullets coming towards you. I don't know, and I don't want to know." Grandpa doesn't talk much about his time, but I felt so privileged that he spoke to me about some of the things he went through. He is so special to me, and I hope to interview him more and write down his stories before he passes. I will tell you my father's story. He committed suicide on January 24th, when my father joined the army. After a few months later, he was told he was being deployed to Vietnam. At the time, his wife, not my mother, was heavily pregnant. For a few weeks, he was trained for his mission. He was a sharpshooter. It causes an enormous amount of stress and anxiety for them, especially her being pregnant with their first child. The stress caused her to miscarry. The day after her loss, my father was told he would not be sent to Vietnam. This caused a lot of stress for my father and her. Eventually, they divorced. He was later diagnosed with bipolar and anxiety. He always grieved for his daughter. He shot himself in the head on the date mentioned above. He suffered so much because of this incident and many other traumas associated with being in the army. Fuck them and what they do to veterans. Zero help to take care of these people who served. Even his veteran psychiatrist committed suicide last year. My Vietnamese grandfather used to work for America from Vietnam. When all hell broke loose, he sided with the Americans. Needless to say, after the war he was captured and put in prison in Vietnam. My mom was still a baby at the time. The Vietnamese people, or police, captured my grandfather after the war, but his wish was to capture him when my grandmother got home. This way, my mother, as a baby, wouldn't be left alone. They respected his wish and so it happened. He passed away in 2006 of age. My mom was adopted, hence the big age gap. He apparently used to work for the CIA according to my mom. But me and my siblings don't really believe it, haha. It would be too crazy and she loves making stories more spectacular than they often are. My grandmother is on the verge of dying, so that will be another soul lost that has lived through it. She probably doesn't remember it anymore anyway, sadly. And for the people that are skeptical of what I'm writing here and have looked at my history. Yes, I live in Belgium, born and raised here. Half Belgian, half Vietnamese. Smile. Edit. I probably misinterpret the question, but we'll let the comment stay if you wish. My grandfather did aircraft repairs during Vietnam. He was never in combat. Says the closest he came was once he did see someone and they both seemed surprised. They looked at each other and then just walked different ways, neither of them wanting to engage. I don't know how much of it was true and how much it was trying to water down a bad experience. Friend of mine was a corpsman in Vietnam. Would fly on the helicopter, land in a war zone, load the wounded on the helicopter, and fly off. Got shot at a lot. In his downtime he would trade morphine for bags of weed. He also used morphine on himself. Everyone there was on drugs, he said. My drama teacher was a reporter for the army newspaper. Once landed in a fort under assault during a lull. He thought he was going to take pictures. Instead he had to load dead bodies into the helicopter as fast as he could, and then fly out. My other friend doesn't talk about it much other than, "I'm not proud of serving. I only did what I could to survive." He was a draftee, in the infantry. Doesn't watch war movies, either. My dad was a tunnel rat. Used to crawl through VK tunnels with nothing but a handgun and a torch. 69-72. Ran Black Ops missions at New Guinea afterwards. He's 72 now and still going strong. I know a guy whose dad was very rich. They got some doctor to claim he had bone spurs in order to dodge the draft. He later admitted to lying and committing fraud. Then many years later he made fun of some Vietnam vets and called them losers for getting caught or killed.